big one. I mean, you accidentally walk into the airport with your firearm, accidentally, go up to security. You're not going to get arrested if you have a license to carry in Texas, which is big because now not only are you not facing the criminal charges, you're just worried about the civil penalty, like Richard said that we talked about previously.
We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we are answering your questions. These are questions that you have left in the comments section. If you want maybe potentially one of your questions answered in the future, it helps out a lot if you write the word question out, your question there. We love discussing these things. Leslie Cross, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
We got a lot of fun things to talk about. Trespassing some cops, horizontal foregrips, and licensing. Folks who just moved to Texas, we've gotten this question a lot. Should they get their license? And so much more. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And I'm going to give this first question to you, Leslie. This is from Shanlib. Question. In regards to your explanation about trespassing, do the comments you made also apply to law enforcement officers who have no statutory authority to be on your property and who have been told by you that they are trespassed and they have to leave immediately? If they refuse to comply, can you use necessary force to remove them from your property? I have seen many YouTube videos where Leos do not feel they have to comply and refuse to leave a person's property. I have not seen anyone try to use force to gain compliance. Do the laws apply to law enforcement officers or not? And if they do, what would be the consequences to the property owner if using whatever force is necessary to gain compliance?
This is a tough one. And I feel like people...
Anytime you're using necessary force to gain compliance over police officers, guess what? They're going to have a bad time.
A real bad time, yeah. And I think a lot of people don't like the answer to this. Unfortunately, police officers have a lot of power in most states, and they kind of can do what they want at the moment, unfortunately. Now, obviously, to come into your home or to search your home, police officers have to have a warrant. If they have a warrant, even if it's for the wrong house, you need to comply and you need to let them come in because that's the best way that's going to work.
Yeah, the place to fight that's in the courtroom.
Right, exactly. The place to fight is in the courtroom. And I'm sure we've all heard of cases where police officers actually have a warrant and it is for the wrong house. And some of those have ended very badly for the people who live in the home and actually resulted in them being murdered, essentially, by the police officers. So can you use force to get police officers off your property? The answer is no.
Yeah, generally no. And what you'll look at is in your state's law, because most states have something like this, and it is rarely used successfully. Mm-hmm. And that talks about when a use of force, so think punch, grab, tackle, restrain, would be justified against a peace officer. And typically there has to be several triggering events, like if the police officer is using overwhelming force more than is necessary before any resistance is offered, to preserve your life, something like that, very narrowly tailored, again, very rarely successfully used. So you gotta be careful of that.
Yeah, most likely if you try to use some sort of force against police officers, they're going to use greater force against you, and potentially it's going to result in your life being taken. People attacking police officers doesn't go well. Even if you're trying to say, well, you're on my property and you need to leave. Police officers aren't going to leave just because you tell them to leave. If they believe that they are investigating a crime, they actually have the right to be there. Again, even if they are at the wrong home, if they come to your house and they say, hey, we got called to this house, we believe there's a crime occurring, and you say, no one called, I have no idea. You still have to go out. You still have to talk to them. It's not going to go well if you don't cooperate with them at that time. Again, time to fight it is in a courtroom. There's not a whole lot that can happen to the police officers, unfortunately. They have immunity from being sued in most states. So suing police isn't super successful. You can always call and ask to speak to their supervisor or sergeant to report a police officer who's acting inappropriately or using more force than they should. Again, up to the police department if they act on those claims or complaints.
Yeah, the thing to keep in mind with a lot of this stuff, and again, this is obviously not, we're telling you the state of the law, not necessarily this is the way we want the world to be, but, sovereign immunity, all right, well, that protects them quite a bit. What are most of the remedies for this type of violation? Well, sometimes they would exclude evidence at trial. Maybe they are in a place they're not legally allowed to be and they, discover evidence. They violated somebody's rights and it led to the discovery of some evidence. Maybe that evidence gets excluded, but you see, there's not a lot of helpful remedies for folks. And so, I will say the one part where it is helpful is saying, hey, get off my property,
Sure.
that it is a clear demonstration that they do not have your consent to be in a location, to be conducting a search, because, if they end up discovering evidence of a crime at that location, if the police want to argue, hey, we didn't need a warrant and this person consented, well, you saying, hey, get off my property, I don't want you here, leave immediately, that's all good evidence that the person didn't consent. So it can be helpful in that regard.
Okay. So this next question is from Cody Kuhn 5520, and the question is, if a business asks you to leave because your cover garment slips and they see your firearm, but they won't let you leave because they want the police to talk to you, what is your best course of action?
Well, I would probably just vocalize, hey, I'm trying to leave immediately, because, and this is where you get kind of some nitty gritty trespass law. Trespass is entering a place knowing that entry is forbidden or remaining in a place after being told to depart. Well, they're kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth at that point if they're saying, hey, you're a trespasser, leave immediately, don't leave, waiting for police. It really undermines their trespass claim. I would just vocalize, I'm trying to leave. I don't want to be here anymore. You're holding me against my will. I would kind of narrate the situation. Apart from that, what would you recommend?
You know what? That's a hard situation to be in. Technically a business in that situation doesn't really have a right to keep you there.
Yeah. Maybe they're unlawfully restraining you.
Yeah, that's what I would say. There's the shopkeeper's right. If you are stealing from them, in this situation, you're not. So they really kind of have to let you leave. What's going to happen if the police come and they want to talk to you and you're not there? Is that going to cause more problems? Is the DA going to say, oh, well, you fled the scene, you didn't even talk to police? Those are always things to consider. Like Richard said, I think narrating and letting them know, look, I'm trying to leave. I have no problems leaving. I would be more than happy to leave. I'd be more than happy to go put my firearm in my vehicle. You're not allowing me to leave. And especially letting the police officers know when they get there that, hey, I tried to leave. I was trying to cooperate. I was trying to leave. I'm sorry. I didn't know that they didn't allow firearms here. I would definitely let the police know that.
Yep. All right, next one, and I'll answer this one. This is from Anthony at Guardian Survival Tools. Question: what right does a Texas church security team have in removing someone who's causing a disturbance? It seems they must be told to leave and that they are trespassing, and then given a reasonable amount of time to depart. How do churches protect themselves from removing somebody lawfully? So yeah, again, we wanted to go over a couple of trespass issues because we brought this up in the last one. Again, going back, trespass, knowing entry is forbidden, refusing to depart after being told to. So telling the person, hey, you got to leave immediately, you don't want to immediately follow that up with a body slam, right? You obviously you want to give them a reasonable amount of time to comply. But at that point, if they're refusing to depart, let's say they're taking detours or they're causing unnecessary delay, using, a reasonable amount of force, think the least amount of force necessary to terminate the trespass, that would be appropriate. Folks, keep your churches safe. I know that comes up a lot, and that is a question that we receive a lot.
So kind of going back on the last question, what if they try to get someone to leave and the person is trying to leave, but they want them to stay there to talk to police? Do they have to let the person go?
Yeah, I would say get the person out of there, right? And obviously the goal there is keep the congregation, keep the church members safe, get the disturbance away from the people. You don't want to have this guy hanging around. So, yeah. All right, this one is to you, Leslie. This is 30 AR5. Question: as it stands now, you cannot attach a vertical foregrip to a pistol, and he talks about AR pistols here, without creating an AOW, any other weapon. Would it be legal or technically correct to say you could attach a vertical foregrip to the side rail of the weapon platform and create a horizontal foregrip? I guess this will also apply to those canted vertical grips that are angled out at 45 degrees. If the letter of the law says vertical and the spirit of the law says it's an infringement on the Second Amendment, could these straight grips be counted as angled foregrips in the aforementioned configurations? So the law doesn't use the term vertical foregrip. I mean, this is stuff that we get guidance from the ATF. Really, what are they looking at?
Yeah, so if you're making a firearm that is going to be designed to be fired with more than one hand, so if you're going to have two hands to fire it,
and it's under the 26 inches, right? Correct.
So again, AR pistol, you put it on the side and now you're going to hold that in addition, then it's probably going to be an AOW, and that's going to be a problem if you don't have a tax stamp for it. I believe there's also some guidance from the ATF regarding the degree at which the foregrip is. If it's at 90 degrees, then that's kind of considered, the vertical foregrip. So simply having that on your firearm, I think you're kind of, splitting hairs on that and potentially playing with fire.
Yeah. And again, it goes towards the, designed and intended to be fired with one hand. That's what gives us that protection of the pistol. And so anytime we start deviating outside of that, that's when the ATF it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, looking at the characteristics of the firearm. Now, obviously, we don't have this factoring criteria stuff. All that's gone out the window. But just because that's not in the regulation, I mean, those are still kind of the things the government's going to be looking at. I would say generally, each one of these items, all these websites sell all kinds of things, say they're all ATF compliant. I would just say, use your best judgment. Obviously, speak to an attorney if you're, overly concerned about these things. But, there are some things that perfectly fine, don't seem to raise the ire of the ATF we have currently. Who knows? They could change their mind arbitrarily. It's like they've done that before in the past, and we're all just like a bunch of beat dogs over here, just waiting for the other shoe to drop. But just be very careful when it comes to this stuff.
And I will say those websites that sell these things that do say ATF compliant, or they come up with something new and they word it kind of differently. They don't have your back when you end up getting arrested for this. So they don't step up and say, "Oh, well, we sold it as though it was ATF compliant." They just disappear into the wind.
Yeah. So be careful.
This one is from Redacted Information, and it says, my FFL is 100% electronic. I fill out the 4473 on an iPad now. Is that something I should avoid?
No.
Yeah, no. I think, every firearm I've purchased in the last year, I've had to fill out every single 4473 on an iPad. So I think that's just what they're going towards.
Yeah, I'd say the only downside to that is, sometimes you're checking certain boxes, right, and the thing is registering it somewhere else. So just be very, very careful. I can't tell you how many clients we've spoken to who, obviously they're answering no on all these prohibited person questions, but for whatever reason the wrong box got checked. Just double check your answers, and usually before you submit, right, it gives you an option to review all of your information. So I'd say that's really the only downside that I've experienced with these things, but otherwise they're perfectly fine.
And I know there's some issues with people who might be of an older generation who aren't as tech savvy. So that's a downfall too.
What are you talking about? Old people love iPads.
Yeah, okay.
All right, next one is, this is Burles38. All right, this is our license to carry holder. Should he get one? Question, I just moved from Maine to Fort Worth. Is there any advantage to getting a license to carry rather than exercising constitutional carry? Now, in our previous video, we talked about, flying with your firearm and the TSA and how a Texas license to carry, we have a prohibited places law under Texas law that says a generally secured portion of airports, those are off limits. That law doesn't apply to license holders, or at least, you have to be given an opportunity to leave and put it in your vehicle, catch your flight, all these other things. So that's one example of, you still get your license to carry. There's a lot of reasons why you should still get your Texas license.
Yeah, that's a big one. You accidentally walk into the airport with your firearm, accidentally, go up to security. You're not going to get arrested if you have a license to carry in Texas, which is big because now not only are you not facing the criminal charges, you're just worried about the civil penalty, like Richard said that we talked about previously. Another big benefit is that if you purchase firearms frequently, they can use your license to carry in lieu of actually having to do a background check in a lot of situations, which saves you a lot of time. I can say personally, this past Christmas, I was going to purchase a firearm, and the guy was like, "Hey, just so you know, it's probably gonna take about 3 hours to complete your background check. That's how backed up we are." And I said, "Oh, I have a license to carry." And he said, "Oh, never mind. You'll be out of here in 10 minutes." And I was.
And you remember during C-19, during the pandemic, all of the NICS got crushed, and the only folks who were getting firearms transferred to them were folks who had licenses or permits issued from their home states where it served as a substitute to the background check. These other people got shut out for a long time. So in a case of an emergency, yes, you'd want that. The other one, I'll say cops treat it kind of like an instant background check.
They do.
They like it. We have all these defenses built into our law. We talked about the smoothing the firearms transfer. Reciprocity. Texas has a widely recognized license, although we do have a ton of constitutional carry states now, so maybe it's less important. And what else?
Yeah, so another benefit would be school zones. If you have a license to carry issued from the state in which you are in, then you can, go into the school zone.
Yeah, the federal gun-free school zone doesn't apply. Yeah, that's a good one. We talked about that just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Too.
So still the building, can't go into the building, but if you're dropping your kiddo off or picking your kiddo up, then you can have the firearm in your vehicle if you have the license to carry. If you're doing constitutional carry, then 1,000 feet within the school would be a no-go zone.
And maybe that's specific to Texas. We define our prohibited place as the building. So obviously check your state's law with, are the grounds of the school included? But really, when it comes to the federal gun-free school zones law, that's what we're talking about.
And And then signage, here in Texas, 30.6, 30.7 sign, that's specific to someone who's carrying under the privileges of a license to carry. So a business has to have the specific 30.6, 30.7 sign to prevent you from carrying into a location if you have a license to carry. If you're carrying under constitutional carry, any sign that says no firearms, the gun buster sign, the
No
circle,
weapons.
no weapons,
Yeah.
any of that signage would prevent you from carrying if you're carrying under constitutional carry. So, it's potential that,
I can hear the comments. They don't prevent you from carrying. They just, maybe it's a trespass
sure,
if it comes to the attention of the folks.
which is true. But potentially you could carry into more places with a license to carry versus carrying under constitutional carry. I think the biggest one is what Richard said earlier, is how law enforcement treats it. You get pulled over, you have your firearm in your vehicle, you hand the officer your license to carry as well as your license. They immediately know you've had training, you passed a background check. They know that to some degree you're allowed to have this firearm.
Yeah, as opposed to having to take your driver's license back to their car, run your background. It's kind of an instant, all right, you're probably fine. But we got these questions from our comment section from you, the viewer. We enjoy these segments very, very much. If you want one of your questions answered, maybe in a future episode, type it out. Question what you want to ask us, and we'd love to discuss it. But we hope you enjoy this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video. And leave those questions and comments down below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.